region for sponsoring this, for setting it all up, and for helping with publicity and registration. We're much appreciated. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're going to spend this next hour and a half or so with us. I am a quick bio. I am a former staff member of the Central East region of the UUA, and I am currently a member of the adjunct staff of the Central region. So I continue to do work with congregations in my area. I am also a proud board member of UUANT, and if you want to learn more about us, look us up on our website. And thanks also to Marie, our vice president of the board, who is going to be assisting me today. I'm also speaking to you from my home office in a suburb of Philadelphia. My home congregation is the UU Church of Delaware County in Media, Pennsylvania. I've been a member for over 25 years. And when I'm not doing UUA work, I am continuing my very, very long career in the field of disabilities. So this webinar, this topic, allows me to merge my two passions, disabilities work and Unitarian Universalism. As Sharon mentioned, I will do my presentation. This is being recorded, and we thought it's best to go to do the presentation first, and then allow ample time at the end for comments, additional ideas, experiences in your congregation, questions, and so on. If you want to ask your question via the chat room, you don't have to wait. You can type that in at any time, and Marie will be keeping track of that. Or if you want to come on live with us after the presentation, just put your name in the chat room, and then Marie will call on you in the order in which it goes in there. So again, thank you very much for being here. I also want to tell you that the webinar is being recorded and will be available in the Mid-America region and the UUANT Facebook page. But if you would like an edited version of the PowerPoint, please email me and I will be happy to send it to you. So this is my contact information. Do not pay any attention to the picture on the extreme right, the small picture. I don't know who that person is. This is the real me, and you see my email address and my cell phone number, which is my business number. So if you want to chat about this or have any questions following the webinar, by all means, email me or give me a call. Let me begin with opening words. Our faith calls us to live a spirit of radical hospitality. Only when we are truly open to the wealth of diversity in our world will the inherent worth and dignity of every person be affirmed with a large voice. Let's not rest until all are welcomed into beloved community. So before we begin, a couple of disclaimers. While words matter and language is important, let's not get hung up on words that may be used during our conversation today or cited in some of the quotes that I will use in this presentation. What matters is the respect that we accord to people with disabilities. And I also wanted to add this before we begin. When it comes to accessibility issues, most people focus on those who have an overt disability, particularly a physical one. Many people who come through our doors have invisible disabilities. Their challenges and their pain at not finding a spiritual home are just as significant. While we will talk about issues that involve changes to the physical plant, this presentation is not simply about building a ramp, installing a lift, or equipping your sanctuary with a hearing loop. Many people come through our doors who have invisible disabilities. And this is just a partial list of hidden or invisible disabilities. Psychiatric disabilities, which include depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress syndrome, among many others, traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, diabetes, chronic fatigue syndrome, cystic fibrosis, attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, and chronic pain caused by things like rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis or fibromyalgia, for example. And this is just a partial list. These disabilities are not always obvious to the onlooker, but can sometimes or always limit daily activities, range from mild challenges to severe limitations, and vary from person to person. They can also result in exclusion, misunderstanding, and isolation. So, with apologies to National Public Radio, let's run the numbers. This is from the 2017 Disability Statistics Annual Report, which was sponsored by the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Disability Statistics and Demographics. So with a title like that, you know this must be pretty important stuff. It is estimated that the overall rate of people with disabilities in the US population in 2016 was 12.8%. Now, in 2017, there were 325.7 million people living in the US. Now, that doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of people who root for the New England Patriots, who in my estimation don't count. Go Eagles. So I think I just lost the New England district, Marie. So if you take the 12.8% of the total population in the US, that is approximately 41 million people who have a disability. As the US population ages, the percentage of people with disabilities increases. In the US in 2016, less than 1% of the under 5 years old population had a disability. For those ages 5 to 17, the rate was 5.6%. Between the ages of 18 and 64, the rate was 10.6%. And for people aged 65 and older, it is a whopping 35.2% who had a disability. As we get older, we develop mental and physical disabilities. And by the age of 65, almost about one in every three people has some kind of a disability. This has great significance for the sustainability and the growth of our congregations. As our members age and develop developmental disability, any kind of disability, if we aren't ready to accommodate them, then we will lose them. And by the way, this is a picture of people that attended my most recent training session. Look how happy they are, and look how culturally diverse they are. But if we don't do something about our ability to welcome older people in our congregations, then we will lose them. And for those older adults seeking a welcoming spiritual home, our ability to demonstrate our commitment to including people with disabilities in congregational life will shine like a beacon in attracting them to our doors. And that's just a sampling of the people that are waiting to come into our congregations. With a disability rate of 35% for people over the age of 65, just think how many people we could lose and how many people we could attract if we paid more attention to accessibility and inclusion issues in our congregations. So the National Organization on Disability did a number of studies over the last several years. And in their most recent study, they concluded this: people with disabilities are very likely to say their faith is important to them, but are more likely to not attend services due to accessibility issues. With the aging of the American population, the situation is becoming an increasingly significant factor in worship community vitality. In July of 2010, the Kessler Foundation, in conjunction with the National Organization on Disability, conducted a survey of Americans with disabilities. And they found, among other things, that about 65% of all US residents, both those with and without disabilities, say that their religious faith is very important. So there was no difference in the importance of religion to people with and without disabilities. People with very severe disabilities, as measured not by IQ anymore, but by their ability to function in society, are more likely to say that their religious faith is very important to them than people with slight disabilities. So isn't that interesting? The greater the disability, the more important religion is to those folks. And people with disabilities are less likely than people without disabilities to attend religious services on a regular basis. So the interest is about the same, but the ability to attend religious services is at least 7 percentage points less for people with disabilities compared to those without. And this gap of 7% between people with and without disabilities in terms of attendance at religious services has not closed. The Kessler Foundation reports that this gap is almost identical to that when it was recorded in 2004. So over the last 7 or 8 years, the gap has not changed. To summarize, by one indicator of religiosity, participation in religious services, persons with disabilities have been found to be less religious. With respect to another indicator of religiosity, however, the importance of religion, persons with disabilities appear to be as religious as persons without disabilities. This pattern of religiosity among persons with disabilities has been interpreted to mean that lower participation in worship by persons with disabilities is not caused by lack of interest, but by barriers to participation in architecture, communication, or attitudes. I hope that I've been able to demonstrate to a certain degree the critical importance of including people with disabilities in congregational life. So let's move on to another issue. This whole idea of inclusion and accessibility in our congregations is a moral issue, and many religions have chimed in on this. For example, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote, "Religion offers community to our lonely human souls. The house of worship represents one place where the barriers fall and we all stand equal before God." Prophet Muhammad, "Allah does not judge according to your bodies and appearances, but he scans your hearts and looks into your deeds." The US Catholic bishops on persons with disabilities chimed in with this statement. "When we think of persons with disabilities in relation to ministries, we tend automatically to think of doing something for them. We do not reflect that they can do something for us and with us. They have the same duty as all members of the community to do the Lord's work in the world according to their God-given talents and capacities." And the United Church of Christ put it very simply, "Jesus didn't turn people away, neither do we." But this openness toward people with disabilities was not always the case. Religious scripture often equated disability with weakness or sinfulness. As in this first example from the book of Leviticus, which offered strict biblical injunctions against the participation of people with physical handicaps in bringing sacrifice as part of a religious ritual. "None of your descendants who has a defect may come near to offer the food of his God. No man who has any defect may come near. No man who is blind or lame, disfigured or deformed. No man with a crippled foot or hand. or who is a hunchback or a dwarf, or who has any eye defect, or who has festering or running sores, or or damaged testicles. And in addition to the horrible language in here, I certainly point out the focus on the male gender as opposed to female, but we can only deal with one issue at a time. This is from the Buddhist Text Translation Society. The blind of this world bear a heavy burden for past failure to tell the way clearly to travel. Some people's mouths are very misshapen. To be deaf and mute is a dreary existence. How do people get to be hunchbacks? They berate and laugh at those bowing to Buddhas. And this from the book of John. As he passed by, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And finally, from the Quran, such are the men whom Allah has cursed, for he has made them deaf and blinded their sight. Isn't it incredible the amount of discrimination against people with disabilities in the scriptures? And I just wonder whether those of us who grew up in more traditional, strict or conservative religious settings somehow had this attitude embedded in us, even though we didn't realize it, which might have impacted on our attitudes towards people with disabilities. I'm just wondering. This issue of accommodation and inclusion of people with disabilities is also a justice issue. People with disabilities experience inequalities, for example, when they are denied equal access to healthcare, employment, education, or political participation because of their disability. People with disabilities are subject to violations of dignity, for example, when they are subjected to violence, abuse, prejudice, or disrespect because of their disability. Some people with disabilities are denied autonomy, for example, when they are ostracized socially, or when they are made to live in settings not of their choice, or when they are regarded as incompetent because of their disability. Victor Hugo wrote, "Being good is easy. What is difficult is being just." I want to tell you about an experiment that was done at Emory University many, many years ago. Researchers Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal conducted an experiment on this idea of fairness. They taught monkeys to swap tokens for food. Initially, the reward was a piece of cucumber, a food that monkeys were too happy to work for. But then again, who really likes cucumbers? But when the researchers started rewarding monkeys with grapes, a food that monkeys much prefer over cucumbers, the latter group, and rewarding others still with cucumbers, the latter group immediately took offense. In some cases, they refused to comply with the task. In other cases, they took the food but refused to eat it. And in some cases, they reacted in a more overt way. In this short clip that you're going to see, give me one sec. You're going to see one monkey do the task and get a cucumber. The second monkey will do a task and get a grape. The first monkey will do the task and get a cucumber again. And you'll see how that monkey reacts.
Recently, we videotaped it with real monkeys who've never done the task and is thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
Isn't that amazing? It just took one trial for the monkey to realize that she wasn't being treated fairly. When we feel we're not being treated fairly, when we don't have a voice, when we don't have the same access that others do, we rise up in violence and in protest. It's behind the Black Lives Matter movement. It's people taking to the streets when Donald Trump was elected president. It's people yesterday chasing Ted Cruz out of a restaurant, yelling, "We believe the survivors." Our sense of justice is inherited and is not a social construct. The experiment that you just saw demonstrates our natural reaction to becoming angry or frustrated when we are treated differently from others, or when we see others obtain or achieve things that we aspire to obtain or achieve as well. Being in right relationship with people who have documented disabilities is more than etiquette. It is more than being polite. It requires that we treat others equally and fairly, that we work as hard as we can to ensure that everyone has the same opportunities, the same resources, and the same rewards. It stems from the basic belief that if I am eating grapes, all those around me should be eating grapes as well. And this issue that we're talking about, as I discussed earlier, is also a growth issue. We can't be barring people from entry into our congregations because of their disability. And for those current members who develop disabilities, our unwillingness or inability to accommodate them may force them to leave and diminish all of us as a result. In other words, it contributes to leaving the back door wide open. So on both moral and justice grounds, and as a tool for congregational growth, I wonder again, is this the new frontier for Unitarian Universalism? I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer. That's what consultants do. Let me talk with you about a couple of the barriers, the more systemic barriers that prohibit the inclusion of people with disabilities in our congregations. Barrier. Religious institutions are exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act and therefore do not have to make physical accommodations. But the fact is, while religious institutions are exempt under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which talks about public accommodations, they are not exempt under Title I employment. So, and I know that not the vast majority of the congregations do not fall into this category, but congregations that employ 15 or more staff need to make modifications to a religious building to accommodate an employee with a disability, even though they do not have to modify the building to accommodate other members of the public. And if they accommodate an employee, they're also accommodating those who come for religious services or use the building in other ways. In addition, religious institutions receiving federal funds are not exempt under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This is rare, but the act does prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability for any program receiving federal financial funds. Barrier. It costs too much money to make physical changes to the building or its contents. Many people think we can't afford an elevator, so let's not even deal with this. We have too much else going on. The fact is, while it may be cost prohibitive to make large structural changes, most accommodations require little or no outlay of money. The biggest investment, we are told, is not in money, but in the effort to find creative ways of enhancing the congregational experience. And a recent study found that on average, the outlay of money is approximately $500. Barrier. Since we can't make large physical changes to the building or its contents, there is little we can do to make people with disabilities feel welcomed. And the fact is that being aware of the needs of people with disabilities and addressing those needs with respect and compassion is often more important to the individual than implementing physical changes. So finally, let's get to a few strategies, suggestions, and tips. Oh my. And if any of you don't recognize this cultural reference, you need to go back and revisit your childhood. Let's start for people with visual, auditory, and mobility limitations. And this is not an exhaustive list, and I'm hoping that many of you will be able to offer at the end of this presentation some of the things that you've done in your congregations that I haven't included, or maybe have but want to elaborate on. So here are some ideas. Again, this is for people with visual, auditory, and mobility limitations. Cutouts in pews for wheelchairs. I took this photo years ago when I was at the UU Fellowship of Center County in State College, Pennsylvania, which is doing wonderful things to advance the cause of inclusion of people with disabilities. And these little mats are scattered throughout the sanctuary as an indication for people where they could sit and park their wheelchairs. Power-assisted doors, assisted listening devices, and even further, hearing loop systems, which more and more congregations are beginning to adopt. Large print hymnals and orders of service, ramps, lifts or elevators, accessible bathrooms, and accessible parking spots. And make sure that you have enough. This is a chart that comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it shows the corresponding number of accessible parking spaces not required unless you fall under the tenets of the ADA, but that are recommended for the number of parking spaces that you have in your parking lot. So you can quickly scan down the column on the left and go over to the right and see how many accessible parking spaces you really should have, because it's the right thing to do. And if you have signs in your parking lot that say handicap parking, with all due respect, I would get rid of them. That is a word that is stigmatizing. It's old school. You very rarely hear people refer to people with disabilities as handicapped. Instead, replace it with just parking. Pretty much everybody knows the international sign for disabilities. Or this just sign, it's the logo itself. Here's another one, or reserved parking. And if you have spots on the pavement for that are accessible, please make sure that they're not fading. I've pulled into more than one congregation over the years. I could barely make out the image on the ground because it had faded and no one had bothered to give it a fresh coat of paint. I think that sends a really, really important message to people. What else should we be doing? Always use microphones. Raise your hand if you've never heard someone say, I don't need a microphone. Everyone can hear me. My voice is really loud. Always use microphones. There are people with hearing problems who sometimes if they're shouting, it makes it harder for them to hear. Encourage speakers and worship associates, anyone who is speaking to the congregation, to speak loudly and clearly. This is a real bugaboo for me. We have people that come and deliver a sermon or a homily, or they may be a worship associate giving a personal reflection, and they're either standing too far away from the microphone, or they're too close to the microphone, or they're speaking too quickly, or they tend to drop their voices at the end of their sentences. At the end of their sentences. And so people aren't hearing what they're saying. And sometimes we need to practice that, because not everybody is a public speaker. Raise the pulpit so that everyone can see the person sitting or standing behind it. And make sure that there is accessibility to the pulpit so that people with mobility limitations can speak or lead the service. Some other ideas. Have a wheelchair or two donated and just keep it available for people with mobility issues who might be unsteady on their feet or who may have stamina problems. What a nice thing to have available. Wear name tags all the time. And I'm really an offender of this. I always forget my name tag in my car. People have memory problems. So wearing a name tag allows them to avoid the embarrassment of not being able to remember what your name is. Record services and make them available. Many of you do. Often a CD can be created instantaneously, or have them available on your website. Hand out printed versions of the sermon, or have that available on your website. And leave seats in the aisles for people who have difficulty moving into the aisles. And this is hard for me because I like to sit on the end. And speaking of seats, it is not okay to force people who use wheelchairs to sit in front of all of the pews or behind all the pews because there is no other seating option. While it might be difficult in some of your sanctuaries, segregated seating is not an acceptable seating arrangement. Some sanctuaries have movable or interlocking or folding chairs. And sometimes these chairs are too narrow to be comfortable for people who are very large. It is welcoming to offer some chairs that are wider and or more substantial for people who need them. Some people have difficulty getting up from a chair that doesn't have arms. So it's welcoming to offer chairs with arms for people who have knee, hip, or leg problems. And it can be mentioned during announcements that it would be welcoming for people to save these seats for those who need them. Have seating space so there is extra leg room for people using braces or walkers or who are wearing casts. And for heaven's sake, if you're not doing this already, please, please, please ask people to rise in body or in spirit. I was in a congregation a couple of weeks ago where we were asked to rise, stand as you are able. And it is just not a respectful way of inviting people to participate in the hymn, whether they're sitting or standing. And don't have people stand too long. A couple of years ago, I attended a worship service, and when I walked in, people were already standing, and they sang the opening hymn, and then there were the opening words, and then people recited the covenant, and then for good measure, they threw in one more hymn. And all this time, people were standing, and it was at least 10 minutes. And I was feeling the fatigue. I could imagine how people with stamina problems were feeling. Let's make sure that people aren't standing too long. And, you know, sometimes it's okay to ask people to remain seated during hymns. I know that in my congregation, we do that when we sing Spirit of Life. And also sometimes as a show of solidarity, sit with someone during a hymn who has not risen to show your support for them. Let's talk briefly about people that have environmental disabilities. This is a growing and burgeoning field of study and research. The term is multiple chemical sensitivity. It can include a wide range of symptoms which some people link to their environment. It's also known as environmental illness, sick building syndrome, or MCS. Your doctor may call it idiopathic environmental intolerance. And if so, find another physician. No, I'm just kidding. The symptoms that people report are wide-ranging. They include, and this is a long list, headache, fatigue, dizziness, nausea, congestion, itching, sneezing, sore throat, chest pain, changes in heart rhythm, breathing problems, muscle pain or stiffness, skin rash, diarrhea, bloating, gas, confusion, trouble concentrating, memory problems, and mood changes. And possible triggers that set off these symptoms vary as well. And they include tobacco smoke, auto exhaust, perfume, insecticide, new carpet, chlorine, among others. These feelings are real. The American Medical Association, by the way, doesn't consider multiple chemical sensitivity to be an illness. But there is no question that high doses of some chemicals make people sick and can worsen certain medical conditions. For people with environmental disabilities, here are some suggestions. Prohibit vehicles from standing for periods of time with their motors running near the building. Use unscented beeswax candles. Keep the property near buildings free of herbicides and pesticides, or post notices before and after treatment. Ensure that at least one restroom is free of air fresheners, deodorizers, and scented soaps. Have a designated fragrance-free area in a well-ventilated area of the sanctuary, and make sure that the area is wheelchair accessible. The UUA has been doing that at General Assembly for several years now. And consider silk flowers or organic flowers as an alternative to flowers treated with pesticides. According to the Environmental Health Coalition of Western Massachusetts, 1 in 5 people experience health problems when exposed to fragrances. 1 in 5. 72% of asthmatics have adverse reactions to perfume. In addition, the Fragrance Product Information Network reports that 17 million people have asthma, 35 million have chronic sinus problems, 25 million have migraines, and 1 to 2% of the population have skin allergies. All of these can be negatively affected by fragrances. A couple of more suggestions. Inform the caring committees, if you have one, of the special needs of people who have environmental sensitivities. Have maintenance staff and others become familiar with less toxic cleaning products and use them whenever possible. And make sure the building is adequately ventilated and aired out periodically. Remove mold and mildew from the building. And finally, give advance notice when chemicals such as floor wax and pesticides are to be used within the building. Many of you, I'm sure, are doing much of this already. But we really need to be looking around and determining what aren't we doing and what more do we need to do. And sometimes the smallest things have the greatest impact. So we've covered much of the physical barriers and suggestions. You may have more that will help congregations to become more accessible and inclusive. But many people with disabilities will tell you that it is the attitudinal barriers that are the biggest challenges they face in gaining acceptance and a sense of belonging. So this is what you call your basic segue. Robert Hansel wrote, "There is no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more. There remains a strong stigma on the part of society toward people with disabilities." Now, I want to tell you that I used to be a big X-Files fan back in the 90s. And one of my heroes was Agent Fox Mulder. I wanted to be Agent Fox Mulder. In 1996, it was season 3, episode 22. The title of the episode was Quagmire. In response to a conversation about Captain Ahab and the white whale, Agent Mulder said this: "I've always wanted a peg leg. It's a boyhood thing I never grew out of. I'm not being flippant. I've given this a lot of thought. I mean, if you have peg leg or hooks for hands, then maybe it's enough to simply keep on living. You know, bravely facing life with your disability. But without these things, you're actually meant to make something of your life, achieve something, earn a raise, wear a necktie. If I did have a peg leg, I'd quite possibly be more happy and more content not to be chasing after these creatures of the unknown." Really, Fox? Really? Without these things, without a disability, you're actually meant to make something of your life? I no longer want to be Agent Fox Mulder. Your name is mud to me now, Fox. You're dead to me. May aliens abduct you again, and this time take you to a faraway planet. I read just before the webinar today that there's a comedian who did a show on Netflix who used the word retarded extensively. And as the joke was, he was lamenting the fact that we can't use the word retarded anymore. And there was a major outcry, and people wrote to Netflix. And Netflix's response was, this was creative expression, and they found nothing wrong with it. Well, people from Netflix, you're a bunch of a-holes. Excuse me, I'm just using creative expression. So here are some strategies, suggestions, and tips for creating a welcoming environment, or what we sometimes call disability etiquette. And as a major aside, and something having nothing to do with the presentation, I was curious and I went on Facebook and I actually found someone named Etiquette. Really. Again, this has nothing to do with my presentation, and I didn't try to friend her or anything. I'm not like that. But I thought, what an interesting name. So here are some suggestions. Greet everybody, period. Offer assistance to a person with a disability, but wait until your offer is accepted before you help. And obviously this is someone with an overt disability. Train all greeters and ushers so that they know where available resources are and how to use them, including the lift, the elevator, the assistant listening devices. Watch your language, because language is important. Use people-first language in sermons, orders of service, bulletins, and newsletters. If you have to use a label at all, it's not a disabled adult, it's an adult who has a disability. It's not an autistic child, it's a child with autism. The person comes first. And when new members join, ask in a sensitive, tactful, and dignified way if any accommodations would enhance their participation in the faith community. We can ask this question without prying into people's personal lives. And if they say no, then that's fine. But if they say yes, then we've uncovered something ahead of time and not something that we have to respond to in reaction to a need that's not being met. I do UU 101 with my minister twice a year, and I'm going to make sure that I mention this in our final session for those new members who are thinking of joining. Here's a few more. When speaking with a person with a disability, talk directly to that person, not through his or her companion, no matter the disability. If you have trouble understanding what a person is saying, ask them to repeat rather than pretend you understand. The former is respectful and leads to accurate communication. The latter is belittling and leads to embarrassment. And it's okay to feel nervous or uncomfortable around people with disabilities, and it's okay to admit that, especially if you just haven't hung around a lot with people with disabilities. When you encounter these situations, think person first instead of disability. I think that really helps. And by all means, don't be an idiot. Don't mock or tease or belittle a person with a disability, either in front of them or behind their back, or even when they're not there, not even as a joke. A few words about including children with special needs in our classrooms and worship, because I know how important this is in many of our congregations. We have a responsibility to make whatever accommodations we can to welcome children with special needs into congregational life. We have to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. Communication with parents is essential to understand the needs of the child and to learn ways to support the child. And physical presence by the parents in the beginning may be necessary. It is not unfair to ask a parent to spend some days in the classroom so that the teachers or the caregivers can learn the best ways to help that child in their participation in the classroom setting. And in worship, dancing or moving around during a service is an acceptable way to worship. So we need to provide space for children with special needs to do so, and be thankful for a congregation that embraces everyone. For those who are interested in learning more, I recommend this book by Sally Patton, who is probably known to many of you. She's done a lot of work in our UU congregations. It's Welcoming Children with Special Needs, a guidebook for faith communities. You can find it on Amazon, and I forgot to check the UUA bookstore, but it might be there as well. So, where to begin? If you don't have one already, form a task force of people interested in exploring this issue further. You call it a task force, not a committee. That will drive people away. And include people with disabilities on it, but don't make it exclusively people with disabilities, because that is not the definition of inclusion. Conduct an assessment of your congregation, and there are resources out there. And in a moment, I will refer you to, I think, the best resource. And begin to implement changes one step at a time. You don't have to tackle the whole thing all at once. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. And each time you make a change, make sure you're being transparent and get the congregation behind you, supporting you. And for some congregations, that can be a challenge. But here's my best recommendation. Look into the AIM program, the Accessibility and Inclusion Ministry program. I am a proud member of the committee that started and oversees the program. Accessibility and Inclusion Ministry focuses on welcoming, embracing, integrating, and supporting people with disabilities and their families in our congregations. Its sacred challenge for congregations is recognizing the humanity and the gifts of all people. Participation in this program leads to certification, whereby congregations can be formally recognized for their commitment and progress. It's a joint program of the UUA and Equal Access, a Unitarian Universalist organization working to enable the full engagement of people with disabilities and their families in our congregations. And it is patterned on the Welcoming Congregation program and the Green Sanctuary program. We have nearly 20 UU congregations in various stages of involvement in the AIM program, and 5 congregations, including at least one that has joined us today, who have achieved certification status. If you want more information, you have the website, the address on the screen that will tell you everything you need to know about it, or you can contact our wonderful AIM program administrator, Reverend Helen McFadden, at the address that you see on the screen. These are the resources that I used in compiling this information. It'll be available on the recorded webinar, and if you want the, if you want me to send you the PowerPoint by email, and I just want to point out that the 4th one down is the address for Equal Access. And if you don't know about us, please find out more, and we would love for you to join. So, to wrap up, in his book, Year of Our Lord, Faith, Hope, and Harmony in the Mississippi Delta, T.R. Pearson tells the story of Lucas McCarty, a young white man born with severe cerebral palsy who uses a wheelchair, but also gets around by walking on his knees with the help of knee pads worn over his blue jeans. He shouts and makes vocal sounds, but for the most part communicates through an electronic language device. Lucas became a member of the Trinity House of Prayer, a small, poor African-American congregation. He was embraced by the congregation and was in no way considered out of place or disruptive. Lucas even joined the choir. Pearson writes, "Without exception, Trinity's members treated Lucas with unstudied compassion. At no financial cost to the congregation, no special programs, no architectural alterations, they demonstrated that making people with disabilities, even severe disabilities, feel a part of them is within reach of every house of worship. Sometimes," he writes, "it's not about building a ramp. Sometimes it really is about opening up your heart." And that concludes my formal presentation. So I turn now to my good friend Marie. If there are comments, questions, ideas, reactions, Marie, if you'd read them out, and then we can all chime in and have a conversation.
Thank you, Mark. That was such good information. I took a lot away personally, and so I'm sure all of us wish to thank you as well. It's hard on these sorts of things, but really, really good information that I think just about any congregation can take from. So thank you. We did not have a lot of chatting so far. So everyone, if you have questions, comments, your own personal congregational experiences, both successes and challenges, you can pull up the group chat on your screen and type in either the question or comment, or just that you have something you want to say, and I will call on you, and then we will make sure you can get yourself unmuted and you can speak directly to everyone, including Mark. Or again, you can type it in. So I do have one question that we have so far that's on the chat. Everyone else, just type in your name or what you'd like to say, and we will continue the conversation. So the first question is from Des Moines. Any recommendations for hiring an American Sign Language interpreter for services?
I recommend that you do it. And by the way, there are people on this call that may have more knowledge, personal knowledge of this than I. So please type your name in for Marie and say, I can answer that. Mm-hmm. There are congregations, there are several congregations, mostly larger congregations that do have interpretive services. The one that comes to mind is the Unitarian Church in Rochester, New York. It can be expensive, and that is probably the greatest prohibition about having it. But if you do have someone who requires it, and you can swing it, what a wonderful way to accommodate that person. And I would definitely put on your website that you have sign language interpreters available, and that is a great way to attract additional people who have hearing issues to your doors. Marie, does anybody have any other ideas?
Not about that question in particular. I can share, this is a very unique situation. My congregation we've been actually looking for a long time to try to find someone that can sign one of our services each weekend, and we were struggling. And then we happened to get someone who joined and is a translator. And so once a month she translates for us for free. But we would like to explore having that option more often. And so it's something to start with. And I know, again, it's a very unique situation. I know most people won't find that, but we were lucky enough to have that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So someone asked, I just realized I didn't say this before. So if you're not sure how to get to the chat, move your cursor over the screen, so then the bar shows up at the bottom of the screen, and then click on the chat button, and then that will pull up the group chat box for you, and then you can type right on in. So one more question, or one person mentioned that their restrooms have a step stool under the sinks for children to reach the faucet, which I think is an awesome thing, and a small thing that many people wouldn't even think about. We have that for our bubbler or for our water fountain, but we don't have it in our adult bathroom, so to speak. So I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Jessica. And then another question from Melvin. How does congregational size relate to ability to welcome people with special needs?
So Marie, do you have any easy questions on your list there?
Not yet, but I'm sure we'll get there.
How does congregational size relate? That's kind of a layered question. So the larger the congregation, the greater the chance that you'll have a larger percentage of people with disabilities, which means you have more numbers of people with disabilities. So the urgency might be even greater to make accommodations. But hopefully, the larger the congregation, the more people you have to work on those issues. And maybe the larger the budget, so you can allocate money to make accommodations to the physical plant when you need to. I don't know that there, in terms of physical or attitudinal strategies, I don't know that it's related to size. I think it's more an issue of the number of people that would require accommodation than anything else. But for small congregations, even if you have just a handful of people that are requiring some kind of an accommodation, that creates a sense of urgency that it would be just as great if you were a very large congregation. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but at least I took up about 5 minutes.
Could I add something, Mark?
Please.
You know, I guess I go back to the percentages versus the numbers. I mean, we know that there's a certain percentage of any population, of any group that comes together, that's going to have both needs that we see, but also hidden needs that we may not see as they walk in the door. And so I think if we come from a place of knowing that we want to accommodate people where they're at, whether they tell us what that looks like or not, you know, we can have kind of a ground level approach to that. And I really appreciated, Mark, your comment about having a place to ask that question for people to not have to immediately walk in the door and say, I have this need. So we actually have a line on both our visitor cards or our welcome cards for brand new people, but also on our new member forms. That's just a question we ask so people can write down whatever they'd like. And then, you know, and then if they need follow-up at that point, that's a kind of an easier start to that conversation.
Marie, can you tell us the wording on the card?
I picked it up from somewhere, so I don't remember exactly. Well, actually I could, let me see if I have it here. What I wrote is, are there accommodations that we can make for you to enhance your participation?
Oh, wonderful.
And I picked that up from someone else. I cannot claim that language, but it sounded good when I got it.
Yeah, that's great. You know, one other thing is, you were talking, Marie, that one advantage in a smaller congregation is it tends to be more intimate because there are fewer people. So it might be more likely that someone who does need an accommodation, who might have a hidden disability, their needs would be attended to. In a congregation of several hundred and more, those people can easily get lost in the crowd. So it would require larger congregations to be even more attentive to their members, which isn't always easy when you have a lot of folks. And your congregation, Marie, is pretty large. Mm-hmm. Great.
At this point, we don't have any other comments or questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to add, we definitely have some time for that. We'd love to hear what your congregation is doing or what you struggled with. or if there's any congregations that have started the Equal Access AIM training certification. I know that's something that my congregation wants to do. I'm hoping next year to get that started.
Great. We'll welcome you with open arms.
Hi, Sharon Dittmar here from the Mid-America region. I just thought of two comments during this webinar, which I thought was just tremendous. Thank you. One is, I served in ministry for a number of years, and I thought of two situations. One involved an individual who came to our congregation with a significant peanut allergy. And most of us are used to like, oh, some people have nut allergies. This person's allergy was actually life-threatening. So that if you ate peanut butter that morning and like touched them and it got on their skin, they'd have a reaction. If it got inside their system, it was life-threatening in moments. And what I learned from this experience is many people needed to be involved in talking about this because nuts are everywhere in a congregation. It's like the nut cookies, the nut cookie from the concert the night before that wasn't your event, that someone left to share, that's now in your kitchen, that someone else puts out on the table, even when you don't want nuts available. So one of the things I began to realize is sometimes how challenging the culture change is and how much communication needs to happen. Because there were some people who were like, I don't think they fully understood the context. They were like feeling like it was inhospitable. Well, these people love cookies. Why can't we put out the cookies? And you're like, hospitable death, hospitable death. And so we really had to converse, and it was the minister, it was membership, it was pastoral care, it was religious education. And there was just significant communication and culture change that had to take place so that we could embrace this, because it was just too unfamiliar for us to have a nut allergy that was that severe. Yeah. And then we also had to work with those involved who were very understanding, because they live in a world where nuts fly around everywhere and they're just life-threatening to some people. The other thing I thought about was at times how hard it was in our sanctuary to create spaces, again, it was culture, where it was constantly demonstrated that someone who might be differently mobile could rest during the service. And it was amazing how it would get set and then the space would get filled in. It was kind of like it got set by someone and then an usher didn't know, or the custodian didn't know, or somehow the norms just shifted back. And so I just found the culture change in communication was really a multi-years process.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Sharon. We evolve. You know, years ago, we didn't worry about gluten-free food at an event. And now, if you don't have gluten-free cookies, it's heresy. And I'm really hoping that that's what will happen with many of the suggestions that I gave today, that those will be things that will come forward in people's consciousness. And maybe a few years from now, we will be thinking, remember, you know, back when we were being really careless with fragrances and flowers and spraying outside and running vehicles in front of the church for 10 minutes. And so I think it is an evolutionary process. And, you know, in Unitarian Universalism, we can't succumb to the tenet that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. We can't allow ourselves to do that. We've always prided ourselves on championing those that were at the margins, even if it meant that those in the majority had to sacrifice. And we certainly need to do that in this area as well. I'm just, are there any more? I'm just wondering if there's, I know there are folks that are on the call that have been delving into these issues, and I would just love to hear a couple of success stories. What have you done that has worked, or what have you tried that hasn't?
Yeah, I invite anyone to stick their name in the chat, and we can hear from you. I do have one more question so far, and one comment that I can read at this point. Oh, and something just came through. Wonderful. So the comment is thanking you for raising awareness, and that they'll be looking forward to reviewing this information at their next membership meeting and widening their awareness in all areas of our congregation.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And then a question from Des Moines. Are you aware of any funding, like grants, through the UUA or others for making these accommodations that our congregations need?
No, but I am aware of Des Moines.
It's a good congregation.
That's a question that we really do get all the time. And all the time. Els, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this too, but you may prove me wrong. I'm not aware. We get that question all the time. Is there any way to subsidize the costs? There are chalice lighter programs in your districts, right? You have that in Mid-America and the Western region. We have it in the Central East region.
Yes, there are chalice lighter calls that go out multiple times a year, and you can submit an application for a program.
And that may be the best bet in trying to get some funding to make some structural changes in your congregation. Beyond that, though, I'm really not aware of any other funding sources.
All right, so someone had just figured out how to raise their hand, and now I lost it. So I apologize. I did not see your hand before. So whoever that was, let me know, because I wasn't even aware of that option. So, but there is. Okay, so we have a couple more.
Marie, hold on one sec. Els, do you want to just chime in? Because you're unmuted, I think. No?
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
I want to say something, because I think this was a very powerful presentation. And it was just excellent. It was so organized, and a lot of issues you brought up to the attention. One problem that we have is the allocation of space for people who use a wheelchair or people who have allergies. More and more we are thinking we just do not want to allocate special place for special persons. So as far as I know, our ushers are trained in asking a person if the person has a walker or a scooter or a wheelchair, where would you like to sit? And our chairs are movable, so it's very easy to let them choose where they want to sit, and then they will help making the space. The problem with allergies too, with fragrance allergies, if you have a large space, large sanctuary, the air moves, and having just only the front row for people who are having allergies, some people don't want to sit there because they don't want to show that they have allergies. They just don't feel comfortable about it. It's disclosure. That's a big problem, of course, in particular with people who have invisible disability. So that's an area that we try to further work on. The other area, I think the strength of the AIM program for us has been really focus on the environment, moving away from the individual, but helping to make the environment as welcoming as possible, just like you said. And the access issue is quite easy because you can see it, but it's the inclusion what is very difficult. And the area that I think has helped us a lot is having workshops and having discussion groups and talking about what is it to be included or not included. We had a joint event with the LGBT group and our people with disability to talk about what is inclusion, because we have something in common there. And it was a very powerful meeting, was it? Inclusion in the choir is remarkable. I'm so amazed about our choir, where our choir director, he invites everyone. We have, and I see people that nobody knows, but I know exactly. One person has memory loss, another person can barely talk, but they all participate in the choir. But it's a wonderful, wonderful example of inclusion. We have somebody with Down syndrome who is not a part of the choir, but he is a part of the bell ringing. That's the bells. So, And he's so excited about it, and he participates, and he's so proud of being a part of it. And it takes extra attention from the coordinator, but it's included. And that's just, I think, a very good example too. I think the area of offering a safe environment, it is not just the environment of asking what kind of accommodations you need, but having an environment where in the circle discussions, you know, the group circles that we have, the challenge circles, that you all are aware of, you know, if somebody has a special issue, that the person can talk about it safely. We had it in the YRUU group. There was a teenager of 14 years. She was just diagnosed with depression. And after a lot of thinking, she decided to talk about it with her peers. And she said it was one of the best moments of her life, because her peers said immediately, what can we do for you? We love you, and don't worry about it. How can we help you? And what does it mean to be having depression? What does it really, how does it impact your life? Because those are the things that we want to learn from other people. And it comes to my last point, is that disability is a part of life experience. We all will at one point of our life experience, or temporary or permanent, some kind of disability. It can be hearing, it can be cardiovascular, it can be you know, the broken leg. It is something that affects everybody. And if it is not directly, then we all have a family member with a disability. So I would still like to stress that it is a part of life experience. I have other little things, but I would like to share that later with Mark, because I've made so many notes that I want to process it a little bit. But overall, it was a great presentation, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, coming from you, Els, it's a great compliment. I want people to know Els has been there right from the beginning. She was with the AIM program right when we started, jumped on board. She and her congregation have been pioneers. So thank you. Thank you for those great thoughts and those great ideas. Just a time check, Marie, we have 12 minutes left.
We do.
I want to honor people's time.
Okay, so we have a couple more that have come through the chat. One from Darlene. We are renting Congregation. Since we meet at an odd time, 4 p.m., we've had few choices with renting sanctuaries. We made ADA compliance our #1 priority on choosing a space. This large Episcopal church now lets us use their listening devices for our service. We are a tiny 50-member assigned congregation. For very little money, we print large print orders of service, got large print hymnals. Our worship leaders are now memorizing this phrase: in body or in spirit, please rise for ... We have mics and record the service for replay on our website. Thanks for the reminder about nut food allergies. Wow, good stuff happening there.
Wow, they didn't tell you where they're from?
It's just says it's from Darlene. So Darlene, if you want to unmute yourself and let us know, that'd be great.
I want to go there.
Darlene, you're now unmuted. You want to just tell us where you're from?
We're in Alameda, California. That's right next to Oakland.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Darlene. That's great.
Wonderful work. Okay, and then another fun one. I am from Shelley. I am a person with disabilities and found the UU Church through the website. I am proud to be part of an AIM certified congregation. Thank you.
Oh, great.
And another question from Des Moines again. Can you speak a bit about getting Braille hymnals?
Yeah, again, that's another question. I haven't worked for the UUA in 3.5 years, but I got that question also. And geez, I wish Des Moines would ask questions that I could give positive answers to. What's that?
Well, we have looked at this issue. We looked at making the hymn notes more Braille accessible. The problem is that more and more people who are blind, they don't use Braille anymore.
It's
They use
true.
other kind of technology. The other problem is that a Braille is a large piece of paper and it takes a lot of space. So one hymn book may be 2 boxes of paper with Braille, and to store it and to use it is it can be a little bit cumbersome. So most likely the person who is blind may have some suggestions in how to resolve it. I think problem solving helps a lot together rather than us telling a person what we can do. Together we can probably get some, hopefully, some good solutions.
Yeah, you're right, Alison. Fewer and fewer people are using Braille, and it is cumbersome in general. And I think that people are relying more on recordings rather than reading sermons or listening to them.
This is Laura. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just going to chime in. We did get some hymnals interpreted into Braille, and what we were able to find is we have a state organization for the blind that bound because the pages, when you order them through the UUA bookstore website, the person they suggest contacting, they arrive just loose. And so we didn't think that was very helpful for anybody trying to sort through those pages. But we were able to go through a state agency and they bound them into really nice little books for us. And then we have the spines labeled with which hymns are in that book, so that, you know, a sighted usher could, for example, grab the correct hymnal to give to someone who needed it. So I just want to throw that out there as something.
No, I appreciate that. And what's the agency that does this for you?
The Iowa Department for the Blind. The Iowa Department for the Blind. And I have Leanne back here from our congregation who helped me figure all that out. So she's
Yeah, I was thinking that for anyone who's interested, I would start with your local Federation of the Blind and see what they have. Thank you, Des Moines. Thank you for that.
All right, that's all we have at this point. Just for everyone's knowledge, Sharon from Mid-America did put in a link for the child sliders for our region. If you're from a different region, you'd have to go to your own site to check that out. But child sliders is a great place to get funds for these one-time needs.
And Marie, did Joanne get her question in? I wasn't sure.
Unfortunately, she did not, and now she's no longer with us. So if we know who she is, we could follow up.
She's still here. Joanne.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to highlight the chalice sliders because I'm with Second Unitarian Church of Omaha, and we did get a grant, which was so critical because we are going to add 2 ADA gender-neutral bathrooms on our first floor. And we've been working on this for a long time, and to help offset those architect costs, you know, up front. And the good news is we are in the process of starting our capital campaign.
Oh, great.
And we hope to break ground this spring, and then we're going to celebrate.
Yeah, that's great.
That sounds wonderful. And thank you for your patience.
Good for you.
Oh, no problem. So anyway, kudos to the Chalice Sliders grant. And it also gave us an opportunity internally within the church to increase the awareness and education of that grant.
Thank you for that. So I want to again thank Sharon and Marie for your help. I couldn't have gotten through this without you, literally. And thank you all for participating. Again, if you look for the recording, come out sometime soon. And if you want the PowerPoint presentation, just email me. I'll be happy to send you a copy. We'll be doing this again tomorrow night. If you have any members of your congregation or anyone else that you know might be interested, ask them to join us. Well, thank you all very much. Have a happy day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Marie.
Thanks, Mark. That was great.
Well,
Thanks, Mark and Marie.
Bye, everyone.
Always great
Bye.
to work with you.
Same
Thanks.
here, Sharon. Thank you.
So big suddenly. Wow.